what is the most horrifying, haunting image or moment that you can't get out of your head? Please do like, share, and subscribe. The only really heavy thing I've witnessed was my uncle's wake. His wife had been shaky all day until in the evening, she broke down over his corpse, screaming and wailing, "You're the love of my life, come back, wake up." I didn't even have much attachment to my uncle because I didn't know him well, and I was just a kid, but that made me cry. Also, the image of his face, my first time seeing a corpse the day of his funeral after avoiding it the past evening, his skin was so pale and waxy it looked weird, and there were spots of decay in the corner of his mouth because he'd been left out too long. Bad day. Talking over the phone to my dying grandfather as he laid on his deathbed while my dad held the phone up to his ear. He couldn't talk anymore at this point, but towards the end of the call he let out one dry, rattling moan, especially coming from somebody as sharp and stoic as he was. That was something. My little niece died. When I saw her before she was buried, I noticed the stitches in her lips, keeping her mouth closed. It looked like they were pulling, as if she was trying to open her mouth but couldn't. I don't know why that bothered me so much. I think about it all the time. Probably when I was 12, and I watched this woman who I fully believe will eternally burn in hell cut this man on a motorcycle off. His daughter was on the back. There was a horrific accident, and the man lay there dying. I ran out with my dad, who had his medical bag, him being a massive show-off, paid off this once. This girl was covered from head to toe in road rash. She was in shock and stood over her father, stared at him and kept saying, "Dad? Dad?" It was awful, and I had nightmares about it for months. The poor man ended up dying in the hospital, and I can imagine what the daughter must have gone through from then on. My dad suffered with a terminal illness. It was horrifying watching him fade away in front of my eyes, and there wasn't anything anyone could do about it. I was there the moment he died, and that moment will live with me forever. My parents yelling and my brother's face while trying to get me out because I was trapped under a vehicle. My leg was being crushed. Little boy who had been mauled by 2 dogs. His whole head had been degloved. Somehow he lived, lost part of his arm, and they broke a lot of his bones by literally biting right through them. My sister called me for help because she went to visit our grandma and she had fallen. I run across the street and look in the patio window to see my grandma on the floor with a pool of blood forming. I was so terrified, and to make things worse, the door was locked and her landlord couldn't get it open, so I kicked the door while calling 911. She was okay. It was just a big scrape on her forehead, no stitches needed, but seeing her motionless with blood pooling was too much. Afterwards, I helped my mom bleach all the blood up. It was something I'd rather never have to do again. The scent, the amount of blood, and how hard it is to clean. I work in a hospital. A patient pressed her call bell, and when I walked in, she asked if I could tell her family she loves them, but an angel is here for her. About 5 minutes later, she passed away. Why you should always wear your motorcycle helmet. If I recall correctly, the pic was actually of someone who'd survived a suicide attempt using a shotgun, but that's the title it always had. No way in hell I'm linking it, because if you've seen it, then just saying the title is enough. And if you haven't seen it, you really, really shouldn't. Rotten.com. Not even once. When my cat was being euthanized, how fast it was, the last breath, his eyes and pupils getting so dilated and looking like they burst. It was awful. My friend having been shot through the left side of his body. He was pale, he was gasping for breath, and we were tearing out his clothes and gear so we could look for the bullet wound. I'll carry this image for the rest of my life. I was traveling in the rural parts of my country. We were taking a pit stop and saw a large truck pass us. After driving for about 5 minutes, we saw a working motorcycle on the side of the road. Beside it was a corpse with its skull flattened and brains splattered everywhere. We immediately called the cops and notified them about the death and the truck, since that was the only vehicle that passed us to have caused this. I was 12 then. While not a real-life scenario, the curb stomp scene from American History X is just seared in my mind. The close-up of the guy when he opens his mouth and bites on the curb, I can just feel the grit in my mouth. I'm cringing here typing about it. The time someone threatened to kill me with a knife while I was at a house party. Long story short, some asshole bumped into me and called me a fucker. I called him an ass, and then he grabbed me and pointed a knife at my face. Internally, I was freaking out, but I was able to give him the "I don't fucking care right now" expression. So, I just shook my head in disappointment at him. He left, and I sat down hyperventilating because, shock, I almost got killed for someone bumping into me. I work as an intern at a funeral home. When my boyfriend killed himself, my boss and I took care of the body ourselves. The moment I'll never forget, though, is going to pick him up at the medical examiner's office and seeing the ID tag around his ankle. That made it real. I'll also never forget driving him to the crematory in our hearse, pushing his body into the retort, saying my final goodbyes, and starting the machine. Back in the day, I was on call for the burn unit on Sunday morning, November 1st. Life Flight brought in a guy who was having a family bonfire on his ranch for Halloween. Eventually ended up passing out drunk in the fire after everyone else went to bed. The only parts of his body that weren't burned were his butt cheeks, which were pressed against the ground. So 98% TBSA, full thickness burn. The guy looked completely charred and black, hair burnt off and everything. He looked like a prop from a disaster movie, or, for those that may get the reference, Donald Loge's vampire character in Blade when he arrives at the hospital in the beginning of the movie. What haunts me is I see him in the trauma bay looking like a movie prop. Then he wakes up screaming. I've seen some shit, but that still haunts me. The misery, pain, the horror. I'll never forget that. Long story short, I did everything in the playbook to keep him alive, but he died. His survival rate from that injury was 0%. So it was right after school, high school, and my mom had just picked me up. We get to the gate to turn out of the school, and we see a kid go under a garbage truck. Driver couldn't see him. Seconds after he went under it, the truck drove to get to the next house. We see the truck bounce up, then go back down. Me and my mom freak out in the car, thinking the boy's head or body got run over. The truck comes to a stop 5 feet away. We see the kid, but he's alive. His leg is completely destroyed, flat like a pancake. He kept lifting it with his arms, but it wouldn't move. Never heard what happened to him, but with the way his leg looked, he must have lost it. When I found my dad had passed away overnight in his bed, his face seemed frozen in fear, like he saw some demons who came to drag him to hell or something. I told everyone he passed away peacefully in his sleep, but goddamn, that face is horrifying. I wonder what he saw before he died. I had to stay for about a week at a not-so-great motel. There was a homeless man who sort of roamed the premises. I don't doubt he was mentally ill. There was also a homeless mutt of some sort that would show up every so often. This hotel was within walking distance of Monterey Bay and sat right off an exit from Highway 1. One night, I was returning to the motel, and suddenly the dog came running toward the road. The homeless man was yelling at the dog, basically pushing him into the street. The dog ran straight into the path of an SUV with a sickening thud. The driver must not have seen the dog because she did not slow down until after she'd hit him. The police eventually came, and I remember them wrapping up the dog's dead body in some sort of blanket and lifting it into the back of the trunk. Mine isn't as gory or traumatic as it is sad, but my father passed away in February of 2018 to brain cancer, and walking in the room and hearing his staggered breathing and seeing how pale and sickly he looked really killed me inside. And then, the sound of my mom's wails and sobs calling out his name and saying, "Why, God, why?" It was really sad, especially as I held his hand and slowly felt it go cold and purple. Driving up on a car accident that I quickly realized was my parents' vehicle and another person's truck. My parents' truck was destroyed. As I ran up to the scene, a couple police officers intercepted me and stopped me asking who I was. I told them a bunch of info, and after about a minute and a half of talking, he told me my mom was deceased. It wasn't until that moment my brain registered the body bag lying on the ground next to the passenger door of the truck. Having to leave your own mother lying dead on the side of the road is not something I wish on anyone. I was told my father was in critical condition and taken to a hospital about 10 miles away, and the officer suggested if I wanted to see him, I should hurry. The whole drive I assumed I was going to walk into the ER and be informed I had lost both my parents. Thankfully, my dad survived and recovered, but I will never forget the look of utter hopelessness on his face when he woke up 3 days later and I had to tell him the love of his life had died. A video I saw on 50/50 of a man who had been cut in half by a train. He didn't realize he'd been run over and was missing his bottom half, so he tried to stand. He spun and fell down in the mud. It's graphic, obviously, but it's more sad to me. I've never felt so horrifyingly bad for anyone in my life. My daughter Kira fell from our third-floor window. My wife and I watched her stand up suddenly, entranced by the rain, and run full speed through a screen. We were sat playing with her, but it was like we were underwater. Our 3-year-old autistic daughter surely was dead, and we helplessly watched it happen. The 40 seconds it took me to get down the stairs will haunt my memory till my last breath. She recovered quickly from several broken bones and a ruptured spleen. I witnessed a really bad motorcycle accident where the guy died. He was dragged under a van for a pretty long distance. I was on Facebook later that night and saw a post from his girlfriend asking if anybody saw a man on a bike like his because her boyfriend still hadn't come home and her and his parents couldn't get a hold of him. I didn't know it was her boyfriend at the time, so I didn't say anything. This was 2 years ago. Their son is about 3 now. I've spoken to her a few times now, never told her exactly what I saw and how bad it was, obviously. I still see it clear as day when I drive past his memorial on the road it happened on. A Border Patrol agent was hit and killed by a distracted driver right next to me. I was stopped on the side of the road at about 3 a.m. trying to change my tire after hitting a huge chunk of concrete. The BP agent was helping me find it before someone else struck it. We were on the shoulder, and a pickup truck came up behind us. The driver wasn't paying attention because he was looking at the patrol car, which was on the other side of the road. The driver veered off the road onto the shoulder and hit the man so hard. He was so close to me. I ran out into the grass, screaming for help. He was about 30 feet from where we were, standing just a second ago. Another motorist stopped, and we started CPR, but his chest cavity was crushed. I will never forget his unresponsive eyes. Never. I had a reoccurring nightmare from about age 6 to 12. The room I sleep in at times had a large closet set into one of the walls with large mirrored doors that folded open. The dream started with the doors closed, and the room would slowly start to spin clockwise. When it reached the wall opposite of the closet, there was a painting of an eyeless woman with rotting skin on the wall. From the inherent knowledge present only in dreams, I knew that she was someone important and that she died at sea. As the dream panned past her, a disembodied voice whispered her name, Lenore. By the time the room spun around back to the closet, it was open, and the interior led to a beach where a large wooden ship had run aground. Various dead bodies littered the beach around it. As the dream spun back to the opposite wall, there were 2 paintings now, and those voices whispered again, a bit louder this time, Lenore. As the dream progressed, the room would start to spin faster and faster. The corpses on the beach began to pick themselves up and started slowly making their way toward the closet doors and the entrance to my room. Each time it would pan away from the closet, more and more paintings would appear, and the voice would get progressively louder. Right before the dream would end, the closet entrance would be packed with corpses trying to push their way in. Every available surface was covered in paintings, and the room spun at nauseating speed while a disembodied voice screamed, Lenore, over and over. That was over 20 years ago, and I still can't sleep if any doors are open in my room. Watching my 4-year-old daughter struggle to say my name while she was seizing. Second was the moment I handed her, still seizing and now unable to speak, to the paramedic. Third was watching 4 massive guys working on my tiny baby girl when her seizure wouldn't end. I truly thought that my husband and I were watching our little girl die in the middle of our street while other kids stood on the porch horribly confused. Worst hour of my life. This just happened last night. My dog was 12 years old and she was a king shepherd, super healthy but had some hip issues. Last night at about midnight she fell and couldn't get up. She looked at me so sadly and I said to her, "It's okay, Sadie, you can let go. Your job is done here. We all love you so much." She had something to drink and eat, and I was just expecting her to get up and walk again, because this had happened before and in the past she was just sore and would work through it and be fine. Well, I went to go check on her at 2:30 a.m. and her tongue was hanging out. She was laying in the same spot I left her. She was still warm, but she was gone. I put her head under a pillow and just loved her and stayed with her all night. My wife was working nights and I couldn't call her, so I stayed with my dead dog till 7 a.m. just petting her and hugging her and telling her how much I fucking loved her and how much she changed my life. I went from, she's okay, she's just sleeping, and dogs don't die like this, she's just paralyzed or something, or I can bring her back, I just need to do CPR. I just was in total denial. This dog was with me through my toughest years. I took that dog everywhere with me. She changed my life. She changed my fucking life. She was a rescue dog. She was abused straight from the womb, basically. We got her at 4 months old, and she was so broken and hated everyone and everything. We loved and loved and loved her, and got her to where she was comfortable around anyone and anything. We had a baby 3 years ago, and she was so protective of my little dude, licking him when he cried and running to get us when he sobbed. I've never been so hurt in my entire life. My baby girl is gone. She's gone, and it feels like nothing will fill that void. I hope I gave her enough love. I miss seeing her at the door when I got home. I miss her licking me, waking up to go outside. I miss taking her in the car with me, even just to go to the corner fucking store because she was so excited. I just hope she knew how much she was loved. I hope I gave her all of my love. I know this is pretty tame compared to some of the other stories on here, but seeing my dog just laying there without me tore me to shreds. I should have been there. I should have been holding her. I didn't want her to die alone.